It's the first travelling alarm clock made by Thomas Tomington in England in 1690, and they used to carry it around in a wooden box and hang it on the nail in the inns where they stayed over, and it has a alarm mechanism incorporated in it, so it woke them up at a particular time in the morning. They had to leave for the next destination in the horse and carriage.
When did you make that replica?
1999 or something like that.
That's the sound of your beautiful grandfather clock.
Yes, it's actually a musical clock. It's not quite tripping the lever for the musical sound on the opposite side, but when it comes to the hour, it plays a musical a tune, and more or less church hymns, I think they are, judging by what I read in the workshop manual.
Was that one fun to make too?
Yes, you can see there's quite a fair bit of lead that has to be cast to work the object, and those heavy weights hanging down below. It was quite an exercise.
Norm Banham has been making things all his life. He trained under his father as an instrument maker at the Mount Stromlo Observatory. And since his retirement, he's been making clocks. But not just any old clocks. He's been creating replicas of historic timepieces, including the chronometers or sea clocks that were made in the 18th century by English carpenter John Harrison in response to a £20,000 competition run by the British government. An accurate way of telling time at sea was desperately needed to plot longitude.
Well, they knew where they were in latitude, but they didn't know where they were in longitude. We were losing all these sailing boats going on the reefs, miles off course. So this chap, John Harrison, who used to make long case clocks out of wood, took the challenge up.
John Harrison spent 30 years perfecting his design through a series of sea clocks, from the large elaborate H1 through to H4, based on a fob watch design. His invention was revolutionary.
Yeah, well, it was equivalent to landing on the moon, actually. They were very expensive those days because you only made about 4 or 5 a year, but gradually other makers changed the design, and gradually there was more market to cater for the marine industry.
When Norm took on the Harrison clocks, he got no help at all from the Greenwich Observatory, where the originals are kept. But through his contacts at Mount Stromlo and Cambridge University, he began corresponding with an English clockmaker who'd replicated the most difficult timepiece, H3.
The problem was, to start off with, he told me the plans were in the Cambridge University library for H3, and I got it back in foolscap page size, but lucky I had a book with a photograph with a 12-inch rule placed in front of the clock, and that gave you the scale to blow these foolscap pages up to full size, and that's how I was able to generate the clock to its original dimensions.
It took the original maker, John Harrison, as you say, years and years to perfect his clocks, but even to replicate them takes such a long time.
Yes, it's roughly about 1.5 to 2 years. You know, it's nearly a 7-day-a-week job because there's a multitude of parts to it. All these wheels have ligament vitae wood bushes, and that's South American timber, which has a wax-like resin, so the clock never had to be lubricated at sea. And lucky I found a merchant in Canberra here that had a piece of timber. Otherwise it's prohibited export out of South America now, and because they've cut so much of the forest down. The other components are all brass, and with H1 in the library, it had wooden gear wheels, and the teeth on it were English oak, and they were made in sections so the grain of the timber was always vertical, and they were glued in segments round the periphery of a wooden boss. But H2 and H3, he switched over to brass gear wheels.
Do you enjoy this work, Norm?
Yes, recreating history is quite a challenge, and I'm probably the only person in the world who's made a full set of Harrison's clocks. Some of his inventions are still used today. The bimetal strip on H3, you have steel one side and brass the other, and they're both riveted together, and your electric toaster and your electric kettle works off that, because as it heats up, instead of going longitudinally, the brass having different expansion rate to the steel, the strip moves up and down instead of going long ways. So that trips a switch on your toaster or your electric kettle and cuts off. And so that goes back to Harrison's invention of the bimetal strip.
So we should remember John Harrison at breakfast.
That's right.
How did you feel about some of your replicas being on display at the Maps exhibition?
Yeah, well, I was quite surprised. I spoke to the curator of the Maps. They looked on the internet, and he was telling me that there was an American company who has made a copy of H1, and they hire it out for exhibition purposes, but $100,000 a time.
You're kidding.
Yeah, so he got mine for free.
Out of all the timepieces that you've made, Norm, do you have a favourite?
As far as attractive purpose, I'd say H1. H3 was pretty tough exercise, and it took me a long time, about 5 months, to sort out to get it going, because there's so many different adjustments. But as far as appearances, H1 certainly stands out as the first breakthrough in putting a clock on a boat and being able to put up with all the swaying of the motion of the vessel.
What do they think at Greenwich now of the work that you've done?
Well, I don't know. I haven't heard that what their reaction is. Yeah, so it'd be quite intriguing to find out.
They'd be gobsmacked, surely.
Yeah, well, that's right. Yeah, being able to overcome all the intricacies of the clock without going over there and seeing them.
You're never going to run out of projects that you want to do, are you?
No, well, I'm 83 now, so the time element's getting a bit short, so...